A woman hustles her way to financial prosperity. However, her momentum would eventually lead to criminal charges. This is the Roselyn Keo story. Hey, Meghan.
Good morning.
Hi. I've been looking forward to this recording for so long. This might be my favorite theme that we've done.
You see my big smile, right?
Yes, I do. I love your big smile. So what we are doing for the next few episodes, we will be covering crimes that inspired hit movies. And I love this because I love watching movies to see where they got things wrong when they say based on a true story, or, sometimes the wording is a little less. It's inspired by a true story. So I am super psyched to go through these types of cases.
I mean, I love excuses to watch movies anyway. But yeah, I'm one of those people, though, I get real frustrated when it says, like, inspired by a true story, and then, like, it ends, and you're like, that absolutely did not happen. And how could you know that? But I think that's part of the fun of this series as well.
Yes.
And I'm kind of excited we're doing something a little bit more fun to kind of close out the year.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is prime movie time when our episodes are airing. So to celebrate the fact that everyone else is at the movies, we're at the movies too with you.
Although, Meghan, I don't know about you, but I started watching the movie that was based on the case I'm talking about today. And then I stopped partially through because I realized it was going to cloud my objectivity. So I'm going to report on today's case. I'll talk a little bit about the movie, but I'm not going to sit down and actually watch the whole movie until we are done today.
I had already seen the movie for my first case, so
Okay.
Maybe that's the difference. I don't think it did impact me, but you never know.
All right. Well, do you even know what movie I'm talking about today? Have you heard of Roselyn Keo?
I mean, in the title, I think you gave it away when you said hustles her way. So I'm going to say the movie's Hustlers.
It sure is. Okay, we'll talk about the movie towards the end. But for now, let's meet Roselyn and hear a little bit about this woman and where she came from. Roselyn, better known as Rosie to many, and actually that's how I'll be referring to her for the rest of today's episode. Rosie was born in 1984 to a Chinese mother and a Cambodian father. Now, her parents were refugees who fled Cambodia after the Vietnam War. The family would go on to spend a short time in Thailand seeking refuge, and then they spent some time in the Philippines until they finally settled in the U.S., where they spent some time in Texas with a sponsor family before relocating to New York City in search of more opportunity. Mm-hmm. It's not clear if they had family there or if they just knew, like, the big city, there would be opportunity.
Right.
But that's where they were headed. And I don't blame them. I think if I was moving to this country, I think that's the place to go if you're looking for opportunity.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yes.
We might be biased, though.
Yes. We are New York snobs a little bit in the sense that we know it's the best city ever. Okay.
Yeah.
So during this time, the family expanded and Rosie gained a little brother. But soon after their move to New York City, her parents would separate. And Rosie was around 3 years old at this time. After the split, her father would visit a lot, but it wasn't long before he just stopped coming altogether and moved on with his life. So
I don't know how that happens. I never know how that happens, how people can move on without their kids.
Maybe maybe the guilt eats at people so much, it's easier for them just to shut it off. I don't know. I couldn't, having children, I can't imagine that.
I don't know either.
After Rosie's father left, her mother took her and her brother to stay at her grandmother's home in Rockland County, New York. Now, Rockland County is just outside of New York City, about 20 minutes. The children were predominantly raised by their grandparents, as Rosie's mom worked a lot of jobs to help support her children. And unfortunately, while her mom was trying to work for the family, Rosie didn't really see her much. And she already has a father who left. She's a young girl turning into a woman, and, you need your mom around. So that was hard for her to not have her mother around. The good news was, though, Rosie had a lot of cousins. Her mom was one of 8, and a lot of extended family also settled in that same area. So while she had a lot of family members to hang out with, but being away from her mother really took a toll on her. And what made things a little worse for her is her grandparents didn't speak English.
Oh.
So she says that she was very embarrassed by them, and the language barrier made it difficult for them to be involved in her life and involved in school. So it really made her feel kind of alone.
Oh, that's sad.
She also says she got bullied at school for her ethnicity since she lived in a primarily white area. So being someone who is a minority and then having grandparents who don't speak English, it was probably a lot for her to handle.
That is, yeah.
But despite these setbacks, Rosie had an entrepreneurial spirit. At a young age, she would buy candy in bulk and sell it at school. Now, this is a very New York City thing. Anyone that rides the New York City subways knows that this is the hustle for young kids, right? You go to Costco, you buy a big thing of candy, and you sell it on the subway, and you make bank. So she was doing that.
It's like the equivalent to the suburb lemonade stand.
Exactly. So she was very focused on making money. Money was very important to her from a very young age. She actually got a job working illegally at a Dunkin' Donuts when she was just 14. And she says this was the first time she realized the power that she had over men. And now this would be a skill that would greatly benefit her later in life, as we'll see.
Yes.
She also worked at Foot Locker for a short time as well. You know, she was a beautiful young girl and men noticed. And, you know, while she was working these jobs, I think she realized kind of the power that she had over men. Rosie was described by herself and others as being a very direct, like no bullshit kind of New York City attitude. This sounds like somebody I know. I'm not going to name any names.
I have no idea who you're talking about, just so you know.
So Rosie also ran with a tough crowd from a young age. She would get into fights often, a lot of times, you know, trying to protect herself because, as I mentioned, she was bullied. She also dated a lot of boys at a young age. Unfortunately, after one particular issue at school, Rosie got expelled. And then not long after that, her grandmother, who again was her primary caretaker, passed away.
Do we know why she got expelled? Because that's pretty serious.
Yeah, I think it was because she had these continual fights. So maybe it was kind of she got warnings and then one fight. It was just, yeah.
Okay.
So now you have Rosie. She's 16 years old. She's not going to school anymore. She's not in touch with her father, her mother, her grandmother, who was her primary caregiver, passed away. I don't believe she had a tight relationship with her grandfather. She didn't really have much direction. So she drops out of school and she began working at a nearby diner.
Okay.
And again, good for her because she's trying to figure out how to support herself.
Yeah, she's working.
While at this diner, she would meet a bunch of men. These men in particular were customers that were coming from a nearby gentleman's club called Lace. And actually one night, one of Lace's managers came in to eat. When he saw Rosie, he gave her uniform a long up and down look, dropped a $20 tip on a $20 bill, and suggested she stop by the club if she wanted to make some real money.
Do we know how old she was then?
Oh, yeah. She was just going on 17.
Oh, okay.
But she had a fake ID, as many people did back in this time. Yeah. Fake IDs are... Today, you can't really have a fake ID with technology.
Yeah.
But fake IDs were pretty easy to get and use back in like the early 2000s and the late 90s.
I mean, I had one for college. I assume that you did.
I had one when I was 14, Meghan. And her name was Enot Baynard. Hold on. Enot Baynard, if you are out there listening, thank you very much. Because of you, I got to go to many New York City clubs as a youngster.
Wow. Too young, Amy. Too young, but okay.
Too young. Okay, maybe I was 15, but I was pretty young. Anyway, so Rosie had this fake ID, so she lied about her age. She went over to Lace the very next day. And by her recollections, she was making immediately $500 to $1,000 cash a night. Now, she had never been paid so well. She had never seen so much money. She found it thrilling, the attention that she would get and the amount of money that she would bring home.
Sure.
So she knew that she wanted more. So this was like a taste of it for her. And she says that she knew to make the real money, it was time to go into New York City. Because again, she's only 20 minutes away from New York City.
Oh, so I'm sorry. The club Lace was not in the city.
Lace was in Rockland County by the diner that she worked at.
I was going to say, I've never heard of it. As in New York City, they have a couple big ones. Okay, gotcha.
Rosie says she loved how powerful she felt once she joined the New York City strip club scene. And she was making more money than she ever had, about $2,000 cash a week. And what was really important to her was that she prided herself on being, quote, a sophisticated hustler. Actually, that's the name of her memoir, Sophisticated Hustler.
Oh, okay.
And she would use her earnings from various gentlemen's club to get her GED and then enroll in Berkeley College. Now, she wouldn't finish college, but she was interested in nursing. She wasn't sure she wanted to go in healthcare administration, so she had big goals. This was only like a stop on her trajectory.
Good for her.
But very soon, she moved on to bigger opportunities. You're going to recognize these names: Times Square's Flash Dancers Club and Larry Flint's Hustler Club.
Exactly. New York.
Mm-hmm. And everything would change in 2007 when she met a fellow dancer named Samantha Fox. Now, Samantha Fox was born Samantha Barbash. So in case you hear that, I know that name probably sounds familiar if you heard the story. So these two women met at Larry Flint's Hustler Club. Samantha was a single mother from the Bronx, and she was one of the top moneymakers at the club. However, she was getting pretty old. Now, in that profession, do you want to guess what pretty old means?
I knew you were going to say that. Oh, gosh. Like 35?
No, she was just getting into her 30s, and she was pretty much aging out. But Samantha was smart. She stayed on top of her profession by cultivating and mentoring younger dancers. So she knew she was aging out, but her business was not going to suffer.
30. Oh, gosh. Okay. Hurts my feelings.
I know. And Samantha saw potential in Rosie, and the two began working together. They would earn extra money together in tips and beautiful gifts from their male clientele. And as Rosie would say, their clientele was mostly, quote, Wall Street types.
Mm-hmm.
So needless to say, these two women were very financially comfortable at this time.
Okay.
However, things were about to change for them. Soon after meeting Samantha, Rosie took a break from the club scene to have her baby girl. Initially, she wanted to get out of the industry. She wanted to, change her life and do something else, but it was really hard because she was making so much money as a dancer. She also tried to get a job in retail, but she didn't have experience, and she found it very difficult. And then, to make matters even worse, she had a big fight with her baby's father, so she needed to go back to work to support her child because the baby's father left for some time. The problem is, she says when she went back into the club scene, that the industry was quite different than it was when she left. The 2008 financial crisis had taken a toll on the club's clientele, which of course meant a downturn in the women's pay.
Ah, yes.
Besides the 2008 financial crisis, there also seemed to be a waning interest in gentlemen's club. I was trying to find out why this was, and the only thing I could really find is that there had been a string of mob arrests the year prior, which scared some people off. But I'm sure there were many other explanations as well, but I'm not quite sure.
I was just thinking maybe the rise of like online pornography as well.
Oh,
not pornography, but just access to online. Well, I guess it is pornography or just access to online types of viewing, stuff like that. I'm not sure, to be honest, either.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
That's a good point because some men probably didn't want to risk being seen at some of these clubs. So if they could do it in the privacy of their own
risk being
home.
seen, plus you don't have to leave your home, you know. I don't really know at what point that became more popular.
Yep. So after Rosie had her baby, she says she was now considered one of the older dancers. And according to her, she couldn't compete with the younger girls who were, quote, giving blowjobs for $300.
Oh.
So basically, the industry turned into more sex work. A lot of young foreign women were coming to the clubs in New York City, and they were performing sex acts, which, of course, would make it difficult for the dancers who just wanted to get paid to perform because now men were using money for these other things.
And how old was Rosie at this point?
She was young still. She was in her mid-20s. But again, a lot of these girls were probably underage or just of age.
Wow. That's brutal.
So she was unsure of what to do. Again, she had a child that she needed to provide for, and she couldn't find a job. So she sought out her old friend Samantha. And Samantha had come across a new way of making money despite the lack of clientele and some of the other issues. Samantha had learned a new tactic called fishing. Have you ever heard of this? Used in this?
Not in this context.
Yeah,
I mean, I have a feeling I know what it is, but no.
Actually, as Rosie would call it, she would call it marketing, but the street term is fishing.
Okay.
And it turned out to be a lot more lucrative than exotic dancing for these women.
Do you want to explain how this works?
Yes. So the clubs needed clientele. Without clientele, there was no money for the dancers.
Yeah.
So Samantha figured out that she could, quote, cold call her long list of clients that she had accrued over the years to find men who would be down for just a drink and maybe a dance. So basically, she would go through her list and say like, hey, you want to meet up for a drink? And then they would go to a bar. She would bring along her 3 beautiful friends. They would get really drunk. They would also bring drugs. When the guy drank enough or did enough drugs, they would make him come back to the club. And basically when he's passed out, take his credit card, run up crazy bills. They would also go to hot spots such as Del Frisco's and other places where they knew that Wall Street type men would be hanging out. They would flirt with them, get them drunk, and bring them back to the club.
Like, I imagine they didn't start by running up massive bills. I imagine this started with them just getting the guys to come to the club, like, and to spend money there, and then they saw how much money or how drunk they could maybe get them. Like, I feel like they didn't go straight to that, but you don't know.
I would disagree with that. This was very intentional and very planned out.
Oh, okay. I see.
Basically, this crew of women, you have Samantha and Rosie, and then you also have a woman named Karina Pasuki and Marcy Rosen. And they would find a man who was, quote, willing to party. They would send in the youngest women to show the men a good time. And, quote, they would get the men drunk on booze and female attention.
Gotcha.
They would offer these men drugs, and some men refused, but the men who refused the drugs were given them anyway. This is when things are taking a total other turn. So the women would make cocktails for the men, which would contain a combination of ketamine, Molly, and cocaine.
Oh.
This would be a way to get them to relax, have fun, and, of course, forget what they did.
That's a lethal combination.
After being drugged, the clients were coaxed to various clubs throughout New York City and the boroughs. So this would include Scores on the Upper West Side, also a club called Roadhouse in Flushing, Queens. And as I mentioned, once they arrived at the club, they would have other women kind of waiting, to kind of bring the men in. They would go into a private room and they would just run up the client's credit cards. And sometimes they would sign for them. Sometimes they would get the guy to sign. But these guys were like in and out of consciousness. They had no idea what was going on.
So they're running it up in club charges?
Yeah. But remember, the women are getting a big cut of those charges. So they're taking the men's cash.
No, I get
and
it.
then, yeah, okay. So they're taking, of course, a lot of cash as well, but they're also maxing out credit cards.
Okay.
And a lot of the girls involved felt that there was nothing wrong with this, as the guys had clearly wanted to, quote, party, and many of them were known entities in the club scene. So they didn't feel like they were taking advantage of, quote, a nice family man. Not my words, their words.
Right.
And get this, Meghan, when they would call later to complain about the bill, Samantha would remind them that they simply paid for a good time. For many men, they didn't bother fighting because they knew the only way to win would be to get the police involved.
Yeah.
But you're talking about men who are married, men who are working in high-powered jobs, who, if it came out that they were doing drugs and getting involved in these types of activities, that would not be good. It almost reminds me of when somebody who is dealing drugs, if their drugs get stolen, they're not going to call the police. They're implicating themselves. Or somebody who's illegally in the United States, unfortunately, they become a vulnerable victim because they're not going to call and report a crime because that's going to be putting the spotlight on them.
That's correct. Yeah, no, I'm sure that was part of her logic, thinking these guys aren't going to call the police. They have too much to lose and they implicate themselves in, whether or not it's illegal. Some of it's illegal. Doing drugs, but
it's almost like a form of blackmailing or extortion. Like it's just a lot of not good things going on here. Like they're fully taking advantage of, these men.
Maneuvering, they're maneuvering.
And Rosie says she was incredibly impressed at Samantha's business prowess, and she wanted a piece of the pie. So Samantha was the one who was kind of running this, but Rosie was almost like Samantha's apprentice. She was a little bit younger, and she wanted to learn how Samantha was doing this. So she joined Samantha's operation and she began streamlining the process. She would keep schedules and notes on each client. She would keep track of how much the girls racked up on the credit cards at each, quote, party. She also encouraged Samantha's entourage to pick more high-end clients so that they could get more money. So they would also recruit more sex workers who could take care of the client's sexual needs, because there are many of the dancers that weren't willing to do sex acts. So their little crew of dancers, and then they started recruiting sex workers to kind of up the ante.
This is becoming a real racket. It reminds me of like, an organized crime family here.
Yeah. So Rosie kind of became in charge of, running up the bills and then figuring out the cut for everyone involved and then disperse the money. So obviously starting at the top, they got the most, and then all the girls would also get a cut of it as well. So everyone had an incentive to be involved in this scheme. Rosie and Samantha got the largest sums, and sometimes they also brought in enough clientele through their fishing that they would make the club over $100,000 in one night.
Wow.
And Rosie was making so much money off of the fishing that by 2013, she owned several luxury vehicles, had a closet full of Gucci and Chanel clothing, and had been known to spend as much as $1,000 on one pair of shoes. So she's living it up.
But is she putting any of that into her retirement plan?
I don't know. But, this work was grueling. We're talking about long nights. She has a daughter. She would talk about staying out until the morning hours, then sleeping during the day. Like it wasn't very sustainable. She really wanted to just make her money and get out. But the fact that it continued to be so lucrative, she says it just made it so hard to leave.
It's addicting.
So initially, I think she thought like, okay, I'll get a bunch of cash and then I'm out. But she just kept going.
Yeah.
But the money wasn't the only trouble that Rosie would soon be facing, because things would begin to unravel for the ladies.
So I feel like I remember there was one person who wouldn't let it go, right?
Absolutely. One victim, given the pseudonym of Fred, had met Samantha and Rosie at a time of utter turmoil in his life. His house had been destroyed by a hurricane, and he was in the middle of a separation from his wife. So he and Rosie had bonded over their children, and she selected him during one of her fishings. Unfortunately, she was preying on his vulnerability.
Yeah.
He was someone who was in a really bad place in his life, and she just she spoke to him, and she said she spent a lot of time emotionally connecting with him. And then from there, she took him to Roadhouse, where they, quote, cleaned him out completely. He even begged for them to give back the $17,000 that they took from his debit and credit cards, but they wouldn't. Not long after, there was another client with the pseudonym Doug who called the NYPD and played them a recording of a conversation he had with another former stripper who had worked with the women. NYPD never revealed the identity of that particular informant.
Okay.
But again, there were so many different women who were involved in this that I don't think it was going to be long until somebody spoke.
Mm-hmm.
On this particular tape, she admitted to drugging and stealing from the men. So between Fred and Doug, this was enough to start an investigation. But it wasn't really easy for the police to get information at first, because as I mentioned above, clients were not looking to come out and talk about what they did because their professional reputations were at stake.
Yes.
And without having the victims coming forward, it was hard to build a case against these women.
Sure.
And again, most of these clients were high-profile men in New York City who were married, who had children, who were running businesses. And talking on the record would mean that they would have to admit to their wives and to the world that they have been with sex workers and exotic dancers.
Yeah.
And of course, this could have ruined them professionally and personally. So what do you think the police had to do in this situation?
Oh, an undercover operation.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Do you think it was hard to get a male officer to to volunteer? I mean, these women were gorgeous.
A few volunteers.
Yeah. So you're absolutely right, Meghan. In the spring of 2014, police set up a sting operation. Meanwhile, at the same time, though, the New York Post had ran a story about a well-known cardiologist who refused to pay. So he had a bill of $135,000 that was charged to his credit card at Scores.
What?
And the man claimed that he could not have possibly rung up that high of a bill without being drugged. So they sent him a bill.
$135,000, you just said?
$135,000. So this man, I guess he didn't care about his reputation, although he was a very well-known cardiologist. He knew that there was no way he would have spent that kind of money. So he didn't pay, and then Scores sued him to recoup the funds that he refused to pay.
Well, I'm glad that he refused to pay.
Yeah, I mean, that's very big of him because, again, his reputation was on the line. But that's a lot of money, even for someone who has a lot of money. I couldn't imagine, being able to walk away from that.
That is a lot of money. That is so egregious. And that's what happens with these crimes, too, crimes of greed. You get more greedy and more greedy as you go along.
Yes.
It's never enough.
You become your own, you lead to your own downfall, right? By being more greedy. So I'm not sure whatever happened with the sting, because while the sting was being prepared, this other article came out and it kind of really made waves in the area. So the police were working with whatever they were doing behind the scenes. I can tell you that within 2 months of the article's publication, Rosie, Samantha, and many of the women from their crew were arrested.
Now, at this point, do you know about how long they've been running this scam? Like, how long had they been in business?
It's actually crazy because the majority of their business was only in 3 months. It was within those 3 months that they made over $200,000.
Whoa.
The investigation took longer. The investigation took about 8 months, and it was a joint effort by the NYPD, the Special Narcotics Prosecutor's Office, and the DEA. Once those three organizations got together, that would lead to the indictments of Samantha Barbash, Roselyn Keo, Marcy Rosen, Karina Pascucci, and Carmine Vitolo. Now, who's Carmine, you ask? He's a new one, right? He's the only man indicted. Carmine was a manager at Roadhouse, one of the gentlemen's clubs.
Yes.
He was taking a cut and was also very aware about what his employees were doing.
Okay.
According to a press release at the time, the group scheme, quote, involved not only the theft of $200,000, but compromised the health, safety, and security of victims by covertly giving them harmful substances. Only 4 victims were identified in the indictments, but there were likely many, many more who did not come forward.
Oh, sure.
Now, all of these crimes were noted as taking place between September 3rd of 2013 and December 19th of 2013. They were really working these girls 3 months to make that much money.
Very short time.
Now, I'm just going to quickly run through the charges here before we talk about the sentences.
Okay.
So Samantha and Rosie were both charged with 2 counts of conspiracy, 4 counts of grand larceny, 2 counts of assault, and 3 counts of forgery. Okay, then we have one of their workers, Karina, who was charged with 2 counts of conspiracy, 4 counts of grand larceny, and 1 count of forgery. And then we have Marcy, who was charged with 2 counts of conspiracy, 3 counts of grand larceny, 1 count of assault, and 2 of forgery. All 4 women and Vitolo pled guilty to their crimes, with Rosie taking a plea that kept her out of jail entirely.
Oh, did she have to turn on the others?
Well, I don't think so, because they all took plea deals, so nothing went to trial.
How did she get, if she was one of the top runners, though, how did she stay out of jail? Okay, tell me more.
Yeah, Rosie was quoted as saying, "I thought about it, and I'm like the only one of those girls that's normal, with a brain on my head, and a child and a future." So she kept up, she made some very controversial public comments. While she did not have to go to jail, she and Samantha were both sentenced to 5 years probation. And get this, Meghan, Marcy and Karina were sentenced to 4 months of weekends in jail and 5 years probation. So there's a lot to unpack. Number 1, the 2 kingpins got no jail time. These 2 that were like underneath them in the, the structure, the power structure, they actually had to serve some jail time. Isn't that wild?
Yes, it's strange to me. Usually that would be the flip. So that's why I'm like, what did they have to give for that to happen? Maybe they had to give a lot of information. Mm-hmm. Maybe they had to give a lot that wasn't necessarily information about the other women, the participants. So they had other things to offer.
There has to be, right? I couldn't find it. It's probably like in sealed documents, but there must be much more that we don't know in order for these sentences to be that.
Yeah.
Anything else strike you as interesting about Marcy and Karina's sentence?
What do you mean?
They were sentenced to 4 months of weekends in jail.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were talking. Okay. Yes. I'm sorry. I thought you were talking about the other 2. Yes, you had recently mentioned that you had never heard of this, and now we've had 3 episodes, weekends in jail. But I had heard of this before.
You had, so it was
absolutely.
Really, so I know we had Donna Montacone case, the Yale fertility clinic story. What was the other one? Yeah, and
then there was another one. I don't remember the other one, but it was because you said, "Wow, now this is," or I said it twice that we've heard this.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things like once you're aware of something, all of a sudden you start seeing it everywhere. It's crazy to me.
Yeah.
So yes, I guess it happens more often than I had realized because it's come up so much recently.
Yeah.
Had you heard about this case in the news, like in the media, or were you aware of it because of the movie?
I was only aware of it because of the movie.
Interesting. Okay. So it did make quite of a splash in the media world in New York City because on December 27th of 2015, Jessica Pressler, who is a journalist at New York Magazine, released an article, and it was a cover story that went viral. I want to read you the title because it's just so fantastic, okay?
Okay.
The Hustlers at Scores, a modern Robin Hood story. The strippers who stole from mostly rich, usually disgusting men and gave to, well, themselves. What a journalist, right? How it's so good.
Yeah, that's good.
And if you are interested in this case, you must check out this article. It is so well done. And she spent many hours interviewing Rosie and some of the other women involved. Mm-hmm. And it'll really give you a picture of who these women were and what went on.
Okay.
So you can find a link to that article in our show notes because that was one of our sources for today. Okay, as promised, let's turn a little bit to the movie.
All right.
Have you seen the movie Hustlers? It came out in 2019, I believe.
I want to say I did, but I have to say, unfortunately, if I did, it wasn't as memorable as maybe others found it. Because I do think I saw it, and it's only like 4 or 5 years ago. So I kind of knew the basic story, but I did forget the details.
Okay, well, that's what I'm here for. So in the movie, Rosie, who is played by Constance Wu, was the main protagonist. And this is interesting because some people say that Samantha was actually the ringleader.
Right.
And I think in the movie, some of the media coverage on the movie talks about Rosie as the main character, but Samantha, who is played by the fantastic Jennifer Lopez, she's in the movie, to me, just as much.
Mm-hmm.
As I mentioned, I started watching the movie. I got about halfway, and I realized watching this movie, which is fictionalized, based on the true story, but fictionalized, it's going to cloud the objectivity of today's episode. So I kind of stopped in the middle. But it's such a good movie. Jennifer Lopez has never looked better in her life. Ever.
Jennifer Lopez always looks great. Are you kidding me? Amy, I'm shocked that you made it halfway through any movie.
I know.
We've only watched one movie together, and you didn't make it through the whole thing. You kind of went to bed almost through it, if you recall.
I am.
The only other thing we've watched together, we watched a couple episodes of a series, but you're just not a movie person.
I'm not, but I feel like I'm starting to be. We'll see. So regardless of who was the ringleader, I think from what I've learned about this case, I think it was the two of them together. I want to say that they both kind of ran things. They just had different roles in the operation.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, Rosie is very outspoken. Like I said, she was a big contributor to that article from New York Magazine. And, you know, she talks about how she had big dreams. She had a daughter. She got tired of servicing rich guys. She said they were rude and they were terrible. And that, quote, what's an extra $20,000 to them? We're going to talk about theory in a little bit, but I know that what you have top is mine. This story is such a perfect example of one particular theory. I don't know if I can hold it into theory discussion, but I will.
I'm surprised you can.
And again, let me say the quote that informs my number one theory. Quote, what's an extra $20K to them?
Yep.
Okay.
I mean, I know exactly where
I
you're
know
going
you
with this,
do.
but I'm not going to ruin it for anyone. Do you know, are you going to tell us the aftermath, like what happened to where these women are now?
Yes, actually, that's what I was just going to tell you. So Rosie ended up getting back together with her daughter's father. Remember I said they had broken up for a little time.
Yes.
She was very involved. When I say involved, she was part of the press for the movie when Hustlers came out in 2019. She went to the Toronto Film Festival. She did some talks. But she says that her latest hustle, quote, is the PTA. I fundraise. I do a lot of fundraisers for my school. There isn't a lot of drama, thank God. There is a little mean girl thing, but at the end of the day, we all just care about our children. At the end of the day, when you have working moms, we don't have time for the BS. We're all just about school, work, and children. And that's a quote she had told Vulture in one of her interviews.
Do we know what she went on to do work-wise?
Well, I can tell you she wrote a memoir called, as I mentioned earlier, I believe, called The Sophisticated Hustler.
Right.
When the Alpha Female Takes on Wall Street.
Right. Wow.
Yes.
That's a title.
Yes. So I did read the book and it's very interesting. It's written pretty informally. You could tell that she didn't have a ghostwriter. This is, you know, Rosie's words.
Okay.
And I think it gives you a lot of context and understanding as to what was going through her mind. So if you're interested, you should definitely pick up that book. Again, it's called The Sophisticated Hustler by Roselyn Keo. She also told, remember I mentioned she did a Vulture interview. She told Vulture she no longer speaks to Samantha. And on a side note, interesting point about Samantha is she was very unhappy about the film. So much so that she tried to sue Jennifer Lopez, who played her in the film.
Why? She didn't like their depiction?
She says that she was being misrepresented because she was never a stripper, and she was saying it was defamation of character. She maintains that she was merely a hostess and was not, quote, going on the polls and stuff.
Okay.
She also claimed, which I kind of get this part, she says that Lopez never reached out to her, which deeply upset her. As Samantha says, quote, it's my story. She's making money off of it. If she wants to play me, then she should have gotten the real story. And I kind of agree with this because sometimes you hear of actors who spend a lot of time with people they are portraying, and I respect that.
Yeah.
I'm not saying anyone should be sued. Jennifer Lopez does not owe Samantha damages.
No.
And who knows, maybe Jennifer Lopez did want to talk to her and she was told she couldn't. We don't know what happened. So I'm not faulting J-Lo. What I'm saying is I do understand that sentiment.
Yeah.
And the only other thing I know about Samantha is she also wrote her own book called Underscore, which I think is a fantastic title.
Totally.
Right? And I believe she also runs a spa.
Okay.
And as far as Rosie, I think she's keeping a pretty low profile because the last few years, I can't really find much on her. I know she used to have an Instagram. She used to have a pretty large presence on social media. I don't know if it's because maybe her daughter's older now.
Right.
I do believe she has an X account, formerly Twitter, but she seems to kind of, like she said, she's just doing her mom thing and just like trying to live a normal life.
Yeah.
Okay, finally, I'm bursting with theory here. Do you want to say it?
Go
You want me
ahead.
to say it?
Go ahead, Amy.
Neutralization theory at its finest. I mean,
At
if
its
this
finest.
doesn't give an example of that theory, I'm not sure what does.
I don't
Do you
think
agree?
there would be a finer example.
Okay. So for those of you who have not listened to the show enough to know, we talk about this theory quite a bit, but neutralization is considered under the social process theories in criminological theories. And it basically says that people who commit crime come up with rationalizations or excuses that kind of help them drift in and out of criminal behavior. And it's almost like justifications and excuses for why they're doing something that isn't right. The different techniques of neutralization include denial of the victim, denial of injury, denial of responsibility, appeal to higher loyalties, and condemning the condemners. And I don't know about you, but I pretty much see them all here.
Every single one of those.
Yes. Rosie's quote about, these rich men not needing the money, that is a perfect depiction of denial of the victim. It's pretty much saying that what I did is okay because that person didn't need it anyway.
And denial of injury.
Yep. Denial of injury.
Denial of victim and injury all in one statement. And yes, I think all of them. Amy, I also see strain theory here because in the way that
also, or
like in the way that these women were, they were not able to get ahead kind of into mainstream society, the traditional, you might say, quote, traditional ways. So I think there's strain theory here too. In order to, break through and make financial success, they shortcutted the system.
Yeah. I would take that a step further and say that it's a perfect example of the innovators under Merton's enemy theory.
Yeah.
Because innovators are individuals who are striving for, like the American dream, but they lack the legitimate means to achieve those goals. So they have to turn to illegitimate means. So I think that's a perfect example here.
Yeah, I think a perfect example as well.
Also, a lot of the younger girls who would take part in this, I bet you appeal to higher loyalties comes up. We did this because they were the older dancers. They were our mentors. We were learning from them.
Sure.
Also, have Rosie mentioned a lot of the men were disrespectful or they were just not good people. So it helped them neutralize the harm they were doing because they felt that these men deserved what was happening to them.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. But are we going to get from there to like whether or not their sentences were appropriate and what we think about that?
Yeah, I would love to. I already think I know your opinion. I know my opinion here, but I think it's hard to truly evaluate not knowing all of the information that was involved in the plea deal. But Samantha and Rosie got very light sentences considering that one of these men could have died from a drug overdose.
For me, it's the stealing thousands of dollars is quite serious. We're talking about, felonies here. But drugging these men and the potential lethal harm that these women could have caused and the minimization of that kind of harm that they were doing, I think these sentences were way too light. Totally, they skated on this to me. Not an appropriate punishment for their crimes.
What about for the two women that they had 5 years probation and then those weekends in jail?
Still light.
Yep.
But I don't know. They weren't the leaders, so I could at least, I'm okay with that. But the two leaders of this organized crime ring getting probation and no jail time, what's the message it sends there? You can drug men as long as, they're, quote, sleazy or, you know what I mean? Like, as long as they're not perfect victims, then it's okay. I think it sends a terrible message.
And I think had this been just a financial crime, I could maybe get behind the 5 months probation, although even then I think it's a little light. But I think they could have gone for like almost an attempted murder charge with some of these cocktails of drugs.
A lot more serious. I think these are very serious crimes.
Very serious. And I don't think they were charged with any form of extortion or anything else, but I think there was definitely some evidence of that going on as well.
This is why also plea bargains, one of the arguments against them is they happen behind closed doors and we don't get to see the inner workings of them as the public. We get to see trials, but we don't get to see what happens in plea bargains.
Yep. And, regardless of whether or not these sentences were too light, as far as I could find, all of the women went on to lead law-abiding lives. So let's hope justice was served. Obviously, it's hard to recover from the emotional toll of being victimized like that. But I hope that there was some form of closure for the victims in this case.
It did make for a good movie. I can say that.
You didn't see it yet. So actually, after you see the movie,
no,
let
I
me
did.
know.
I'm telling you, I saw it. I don't remember it that well for some reason.
Okay.
Which doesn't mean it wasn't like a fine movie, but yeah.
I would like to tell you my favorite part of the movie, a part that I did see. At one point, Usher, the real life Usher, goes to, one of the clubs and all of the ladies get on stage, like all 50 of the ladies get on stage and do a dance for him. And, Jennifer Lopez is like the big shot there. She goes up to Usher and she's like, "What's your name?" And he goes, "I'm Usher, baby." And it was just so good. And they're playing his song, "I Want to Make Love in the Club," in the club, sorry. So that was a cool part of the movie. I'm glad I got to see that. And that song is really good, of course. It's
that's
soundtrack.
perfect.
The soundtrack of the movie is pretty good. So
All
so
right.
yeah, I definitely think you should all check it out if you're looking for a movie that's, I guess, maybe a little lighter in the true crime area. Definitely check it out. And Meghan, I cannot wait to hear what you have in store for us next week.
Oh, sure. Me too. All right, Amy, that was pretty cool. Thank you for that.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for listening today. We look forward to catching you next time on Women in Crime.
Women in Crime is written and hosted by Megan Sachs and Amy Schlossberg. Our producer is James Varga. Script editing is by Abigail Belcastro. Audio editing is by Siler Burr and Jose Alfonso. And music is by Desert Media. If you enjoy the show, please remember to follow and leave a review. You can also support the show through Patreon, where you can get access to additional ad-free content such as exclusive full-length episodes, lectures, a book club, and virtual happy hours with Meghan and Amy. For more information, visit patreon.com/womenandcrime.
Sources for today's episode include Vulture, Time Magazine, The New York Post, Oprah Daily, ABC News, The Cut, and Oxygen.